The wind howled across the open Wyoming plains like a wounded animal, dragging sheets of freezing rain across the Vaughn ranch. The old wooden boards groaned under the weight of the storm as if the whole house were a ship, trying to stay afloat in a merciless sea. Caleb Vaughn sat alone at his kitchen table, a single lantern burning low beside him. The flame cast long gold shadows across the room, flickering against the walls like ghosts trying to speak. He wasn't sharpening the knife because he needed to. Supper had been eaten hours ago, cold beans and stale cornbread that tasted like memory instead of food. No, he sharpened the knife because the metallic rasping against the stone gave him something to focus on, something that filled the silence. Silence had teeth. Silence bit. Silence reminded him how long it had been since he'd heard another voice inside this house. He paused. The wind outside shifted, a long, low whistle curling around the doorframe like a warning. He frowned, listening harder. Nothing, just the storm and the distant cry of a coyote. Then came the knock. Not frantic, not timid. One single heavy knock that shook the frame. Caleb straightened immediately. No one in their right mind traveled during a storm like this, not unless they were desperate or running from something. He wiped his hands on his trousers and gripped the lantern. His boots thudded softly on the floorboards as he crossed the room. The second knock came just as he reached the door. Louder this time, filled with a weight that wasn't only physical. He opened it only an inch at first, shielding the lantern's light from the rain. A shadow stood on his porch, tall enough that even with the lantern raised, he saw only the outline of a broad figure cloaked in darkness. "Who's there?" he called over the wind. The figure stepped forward into the lantern glow and Caleb's breath caught. The woman towering before him was soaked to the bone, rainwater pouring from her shawl, her boots, her hair. Mud streaked her cheeks like war paint. Her chest rose and fell in heavy breaths, as if she had run the full 5 miles of rough terrain between his ranch and hers. "Mrs. Brannigan?" he said, stunned. The widow lifted her face. Even drenched and trembling, she was as formidable as the storm she walked through. Tall, broad-shouldered, powerful. But her eyes betrayed her, wide, wild, and desperate. She didn't wait for him to invite her in. She stepped inside, brushing past him with the force of someone who might collapse if she stopped moving. Caleb shut the door quickly behind her, sealing out the storm. Water pooled at her feet instantly. She was breathing like her lungs were fighting her. "Widow Brannigan," Caleb said gently, keeping a respectful distance. "What happened? Are you hurt? Did someone—" Her voice cut through the air like a blade. "I need to make love. Don't move." The room fell so still he could hear a drop of water fall from her sleeve onto the... Caleb went rigid, not because her words shocked him, though they did, but because of the way she said them. Not seductive, not commanding, not even shy. Her voice cracked on the last word, breaking in a way that sounded less like desire and more like a plea, a human plea, a lonely one. He studied her face more closely. Through the wet strands of hair clinging to her brow, he saw the truth. She had not come here hungry for passion. She had come because she was breaking. He set the lantern down slowly. "Mrs. Brannigan." "Don't move," she repeated, though her voice wavered now, thinner, weaker. Please don't move away from me. Not when I'm already falling apart." Her knees suddenly buckled. Caleb lunged forward in time to catch her before she hit the floor. She felt like a falling tree, strong, heavy, but trembling all the way down. Her soaked coat chilled his arms instantly, but he didn't let go. "I told you not to move," she whispered, her voice muffled against his chest. "Everyone moves. Everyone steps back from me." "No one's stepping back," he said softly. "Not tonight." He swept her into his arms, not with intimacy, but with the care one might use lifting a wounded soldier. He carried her to the worn-out couch by the fireplace and set her down gently. Her breath came in ragged shudders, like she'd been holding herself together for too long and her body was finally rebelling. Caleb crouched beside her, pulling a wool blanket from the back of the couch and wrapping it around her shoulders. Her fingers clutched the fabric like she feared it would vanish. Rain hammered the roof with the fury of fists. The lantern flame wavered. The room smelled of wet earth, storm air, and something he couldn't name, a scent of raw, unguarded human sorrow. "Widow Brannigan," he said quietly, "tell me what happened. Why come to me in this weather?" She swallowed hard. Her throat moved as if the words lodged there hurt. I didn't come for what I said, she whispered, eyes fixed on the fire. I don't know why that even came out of me. I only knew I needed someone, anyone, before I shattered. Her voice wavered. She pressed a hand to her chest, gripping her shawl. I'm tired of being strong enough for two. Strong enough for every chore, every winter, every broken night. People look at me like I'm a creature built for hauling weight, not a woman who misses warmth. Her eyes lifted to his with a vulnerability, so raw it almost felt like he shouldn't be allowed to see it. I came here because you don't look at me like the others do. Caleb's chest tightened. He had no words for a moment. She leaned back against the couch, exhausted. Her hair clung to her face, and her massive frame seemed smaller now, not physically but in spirit. Like the weight she had carried, alone for so long, had finally forced her to her knees. Caleb sat beside her, but not close enough to crowd her. His voice stayed low, steady, a calm against the storm. You're safe here, he said. You don't have to explain everything tonight. Her eyes softened. A tear escaped, the first he'd ever seen from her. Outside, the storm raged on. But inside that lantern-lit room, something gentle began to thaw. She hadn't come seeking desire. She had come seeking a place where she didn't have to be a giant, just a woman, a hurting human woman. And somehow she had chosen his quiet, empty house to fall apart in. The storm outside raged with a merciless rhythm, hurling rain against the windows like handfuls of gravel. Inside Caleb Vaughn's ranch house, the lantern glowed warm, steady, and strangely gentle, so different from the chaos outside. Widow Brannigan sat wrapped in the wool blanket, her massive hands clenched tightly around its edge, as if she feared it would slip away the moment she loosened her grip. Caleb hadn't moved far. He'd settled onto the wooden chair beside the couch, elbows on his knees, hands clasped loosely together. His posture was relaxed, intentionally so. He didn't want her to feel cornered. He didn't want her to feel watched, just accompanied. Her breath had steadied a little, but her eyes were still wide with a kind of stunned vulnerability, like someone who had lived a lifetime, armored in silence and suddenly found herself exposed. Why me? Caleb finally asked. His voice was soft enough to be mistaken for part of the storm's lull. Out of everyone around here, why come to me? The widow didn't answer right away. Instead, she stared into the fire crackling faintly. In the small hearth, just a few pieces of kindling he had thrown in earlier, when the temperature began to drop. The flames reflected in her eyes, painting them in gold and ember light. Then she inhaled, shaky and deep as if preparing to lift a heavy weight. Because, she said slowly, you're the only man who hasn't ever made me feel like a monster. Caleb blinked, startled. A monster? Widow Brannigan, who— Don't sugarcoat it, she interrupted gently, though her voice broke halfway through. You've seen them. How men look at me when I walk through town, like I'm too much, too tall, too broad, too strong to be anything soft. Her huge hands trembled beneath the blanket. She forced them still. That night at the Mercantile, she continued, when I reached for a sack of flour and the clerk jumped back like I'd swung at him. I saw your face. You looked at me with surprise, yes, but not fear. You didn't flinch, Caleb remembered. He hadn't thought much of it then, just a moment. A single glance exchanged, but to her it had been something else. Something she had stored quietly in her heart until tonight. You see a woman, she whispered. Not just a giant hauling the world on her shoulders. Her voice thinned to a fragile thread. You see me? The words hung between them, too heavy for the room and too honest to ignore. Caleb exhaled slowly. He didn't reach out to her, he didn't assume he had the right. He simply shifted closer on the chair, enough for his presence to be felt like warmth against her storm-chilled skin. Mrs. Brannigan, he murmured. Her eyes snapped to his, shining with exhaustion and something deeper. A fear he understood all too well. The fear of being alone in the world, even when surrounded by people. The fear of being too different, too strong, too much for anyone to hold gently. She leaned forward, the blanket sliding from one shoulder. She didn't touch him yet, but she was close enough that her breath warmed the space between them. I didn't mean what I said earlier, she whispered painfully. When I walked in and said, that, her cheeks flushed not with shame, but with the embarrassment of someone who had finally cracked open. I didn't come here seeking that kind of closeness. She placed a hand on her chest, pressing it hard, as if trying to still the thundering inside. I came seeking safety, just that. A place where I didn't have to pretend. Caleb nodded, heart tightening. You don't have to pretend anything here, he said. Not tonight. Not ever, if you don't want to. Her throat tightened visibly. Then Caleb did something that made her eyes widen. Not with fear, but with disbelief. He reached out slowly, openly, giving her all the time in the world to pull back if she chose. He didn't grab her. He didn't command her. He simply extended his hand, palm up, a quiet invitation. She stared at it like it was something from another world, something fragile, delicate, almost unreal. No man in years had offered her a touch that wasn't closed-fisted, braced, or hesitant. No one had offered softness. Her large, calloused hand hovered above his. She hesitated, not because she was afraid of him, but because she feared she might break the moment with the weight of her own trembling. Finally, gently, she placed her hand into his. Caleb didn't flinch. His fingers wrapped around hers with a warmth that felt like a sunrise after a long, unbroken night. Her breath shook. You aren't afraid of me? She whispered. Caleb shook his head slowly. Afraid? No, I'm humbled by you. Humbled? You've lived through storms I can only imagine, he said. You've buried a man you loved. You've worked a land meant for two with only your own strength. You've carried yourself through winters that would have broken me. He squeezed her hand, not enough to confine, just enough to let her feel his steadiness. And still you came here tonight, not to demand anything, not to take, just to ask, not to be alone. Her eyes filled instantly. She blinked hard, but the tears broke anyway, sliding down her cheeks in silent trails. Caleb reached up, not with boldness, but with reverence, and gently brushed a strand of wet hair from her face. His fingers barely touched her skin, yet she shivered as if he'd lifted 1,000 pounds from her back. No rushing, he said softly. No expectations, no fear. His hand moved from her cheek to his chest, guiding her hand with it until her palm rested over his heartbeat. Slow, steady, grounding. You don't need to beg for someone to stay, he whispered. I'm here, and I'm not leaving. Her breath caught. The room seemed to exhale with her. She leaned forward, not into a kiss, not into passion, but into the simple human closeness she had been starving for. Her forehead rested against his, their breaths mingling, warm and slow. For the first time since her husband died, the giant widow wasn't holding the world up alone. Caleb sat with her, their foreheads touching, their hands locked, the blanket around her shoulders warming both of them. Outside, the storm battered the house, but inside something gentler than any wind stirred quietly. Between them, something that had nothing to do with desperation, and everything to do with two lonely souls finally finding rest.